My name is Emma Carter, and I was born in Fredericksburg, Texas, a town where tradition isn't just respected, it's the air you breathe. Here, daughters are raised to be wives, and sons are raised to be legacies. That's how it has always been, and how it was supposed to stay. My parents, Mark and Linda Carter, never questioned it, and neither did most of the families in town. My older brother, Ryan, was the golden child. My parents pinned all their hopes on him, even as he stumbled through life without direction. Meanwhile, I excelled in school, worked harder than anyone, and dared to dream beyond the boundaries of Fredericksburg. But none of it mattered. In my family, being a daughter meant one thing. I was an afterthought. I had known this truth for years, but as I got older, the weight of it settled deeper into my bones. I watched as my friends accepted the futures chosen for them, engagements arranged before they finished high school, families planning weddings before their daughters had even figured out who they were. The more I saw, the more I understood. If I didn't fight for my future, I wouldn't have one. But fighting meant defying everything my parents believed in, and defying them meant losing everything. Dinner at the Carter house was always the same. My father sat at the head of the table, Ryan on his right, my mother on his left. I took my usual spot across from Ryan, where I was easiest to ignore. Tonight was no different. Mom placed a steaming dish of pot roast in the center of the table, smiling as she served Ryan first, then Dad, then herself. My plate remained empty for a moment longer. It was subtle, something I might have imagined if it hadn't been a pattern all my life, an unspoken reminder that I came last. "How was work today, son?" Dad asked, slicing into his portion. Ryan, who had been working at my father's auto dealership since he flunked out of college last year, stretched lazily and grinned. "Tiring," he said, as if sitting in Dad's office all day and avoiding real work required effort. "But I've been thinking I might start my own business soon." Dad nodded approvingly. "That's what I like to hear." I picked at my food, holding back the urge to roll my eyes. Ryan had no idea how to run a business, and he had failed at every venture he had ever tried. But that never stopped my parents from throwing their full support behind him. "That's wonderful, honey," Mom chimed in, turning to me. "Emma, you should take notes. Your brother's thinking about his future." I let out a quiet laugh before I could stop myself. "My future is college." The room went silent. Dad set his fork down and sighed, as if I had said something offensive. "Emma, we've been over this," he said, his voice even but firm. "There's no need for a girl to go to college when she has a good husband." A cold knot of frustration settled in my chest. What if I don't want a husband? Mom chuckled like I had told a joke. "Don't be ridiculous. Every girl wants a husband." Ryan smirked, chewing loudly. "No one wants a wife who argues all the time, Emma." I clenched my fists under the table, willing myself to stay calm. "I'm not arguing. I'm just saying I don't want to depend on someone else to take care of me." "You won't have to," Mom said sweetly. "That's why we're finding you a match. Someone responsible, from a good family." My stomach dropped. I had suspected it for a while now, how my mother had been meeting with other women in town, whispering about prospects, mentioning family names with careful calculation. But hearing it out loud made it real. Ryan let out a low whistle. "Oh yeah, Mom was talking to Mrs. Caldwell the other day. Looks like Ethan might be the lucky guy." Ethan Caldwell. I felt my grip tighten on my fork. Ethan was the son of one of the wealthiest families in Fredericksburg, and though he was polite, he was just like Ryan, entitled, privileged, someone who had never worked for anything in his life, and now he was apparently being handed me. "This isn't happening," I said, shaking my head. Dad's expression hardened. "Emma, this is not up for discussion." I looked at Mom, hoping, foolishly, for even the smallest sign of hesitation. But she only smiled, like she truly believed she was doing me a favor. "You should be grateful," she said. "Ethan is a wonderful young man, and he'll take care of you. This is what's best for everyone." Everyone but me. I swallowed down the anger rising in my throat. What if I say no? For the first time all night, Dad's voice turned sharp. Then don't expect a single penny from us. You'll be on your own. I glanced at Ryan, who looked entirely uninterested in my fate, already reaching for another helping of potatoes. Of course, he wasn't the one being sacrificed. I pushed my chair back, the sound scraping against the floor as I stood. I'm not hungry, Mom sighed. Emma, don't be dramatic. But I was already walking away, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. I sat on my bed later that night, staring at the college acceptance letter in my hands. I had applied in secret, using an email my parents didn't know about. I had written essays late at night when I was supposed to be asleep, filling out applications in the school library so they wouldn't find out. And now here it was, proof that I wasn't imagining things when I dreamed of a future beyond this town. But acceptance wasn't enough. I needed money, and I had none. I glanced around my bedroom, taking in the floral wallpaper my mother had picked out for me when I was 10, the dresses she had bought hanging neatly in the closet, the carefully arranged books on my desk. This was all I had, and if I left, I would have nothing. A knock at the door made me stiffen. Before I could answer, Grandma Margaret stepped inside, her gray hair pulled back in a neat bun, her eyes sharp with understanding. She closed the door gently behind her. I heard what happened at dinner, she said. I looked down, not trusting myself to speak. She walked over and sat on the edge of my bed, her hands folded in her lap. You remind me of myself, she murmured. I frowned. You? She nodded. When I was your age, I wanted to leave too. I had dreams, just like you do, but I didn't fight hard enough, and I regretted it every day after. I swallowed. What did you want? Margaret smiled wistfully. To travel, to study, to be something more than a wife. But my parents told me no, and I listened. A bead of silence stretched between us. Then she reached out and took my hand. Emma, not all chains are visible. Some we allow to be placed on us. Her words settled deep into my chest, filling the spaces where fear had taken root. I looked at my college letter again, my heart hammering. I had spent my whole life feeling trapped. Maybe it was time to break free. I should have seen it coming. The whispered conversations, the careful glances my mother exchanged with the women in town, the way she had been steering me towards certain families at church, always making sure I was polite, presentable, and agreeable. I should have known what it meant, but somehow I had convinced myself that I had more time, that my parents wouldn't actually go through with it. I was wrong. I found out 2 days after the argument at dinner, when my mother called me into the living room and told me to sit down. Dad was already there, seated in his usual chair, his expression unreadable. Ryan was nowhere in sight. He never had to be involved in these kinds of conversations. This was about me, about my future, and more importantly, about how they could use it to benefit him. Emma, my mother began, folding her hands in her lap, her voice unnervingly gentle. Your father and I have been thinking about what's best for you, and we believe we've found a wonderful opportunity. I already knew what was coming, but my stomach still twisted with dread. I forced myself to meet her gaze. An opportunity? Dad cleared his throat. You've always been a smart girl, Emma, but it's time to start thinking practically. College isn't the answer for you. It's not going to secure your future. I swallowed hard, fighting the urge to argue. I had learned long ago that speaking up in these moments only made things worse. Ethan Caldwell is a good man, Mom continued, watching me carefully. His family is well respected. He runs his father's business now, and they're doing very well. This marriage would be a blessing for you. And for Ryan, I thought bitterly. That was what this was really about. The Caldwells had money, and my parents wanted to strengthen their ties with them. Ryan had made a mess of every job, every investment, every business venture he had touched. But if I married Ethan, my family would gain favor with his. If Ryan ever needed a bailout, the Caldwells would be there. I clenched my hands into fists, pressing them against my thighs. I don't want to marry Ethan. Mom sighed, as if she had expected this. Emma, sweetheart, this isn't about what you want. It's about what's best for you. What's best for me? I let out a sharp laugh, unable to hold it in. You mean what's best for Ryan? That's what this is really about, isn't it? Dad's expression darkened. Watch your tone. I ignored him, my pulse pounding in my ears. You don't care what happens to me. As long as Ryan is taken care of, you don't care if I'm miserable for the rest of my life. That's enough, Dad snapped. His voice was calm, controlled, but I could see the anger simmering beneath the surface. You're being ungrateful. Ungrateful? I shot back. You're selling me off like a business transaction. How am I supposed to be grateful for that? Mom's lips thinned. You're being dramatic. Ethan is a good man, and he's willing to take care of you. I don't need him to take care of me. Yes, you do, Dad said firmly, because if you refuse this marriage, don't expect a single penny from us. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I had known this was coming, but hearing it out loud made it real. You're serious? I whispered. He nodded. If you say no, you're on your own. I could feel my mother watching me, waiting for me to give in. She thought I would crumble, just like so many other girls in this town had, just like she had when she was my age. She thought I would be too afraid to walk away, that the idea of being cut off would scare me into submission. And for a moment, it almost did. I had no money, no safety net, nowhere to go. But I had something stronger. I had the truth that if I gave in now, if I let them dictate my future, I would never escape. If I stayed, I would become my mother. I would be another woman in town who had once dreamed of more, but had been beaten down by expectation until she forgot what dreaming even felt like. I took a slow breath, steadying myself. Then, I guess I'm on my own. My mother inhaled sharply, her eyes widening. For the first time, real fear flickered across her face. My father, however, only narrowed his gaze. You don't mean that, he said. I do. Silence stretched between us. Finally, my father exhaled, shaking his head. You're making a mistake. Maybe I was. Maybe I was throwing away everything. My home, my family, my security. Maybe I would regret this decision in a week, or a month, or a year. But right now, sitting in that living room with my mother looking at me like she didn't recognize me anymore, I had never felt more certain of anything in my life. I stood up. I'm done talking about this. Mom started to say something, but I didn't wait to hear it. I turned and walked out of the room, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. I didn't stop walking until I was outside, the cool evening air wrapping around me. The sun had already set, leaving the sky painted in deep purples and oranges. I breathed in, trying to calm the storm inside me. I had done it. I had said no. But what now? I had no plan, no backup, no way to support myself. My college acceptance letter meant nothing if I couldn't afford tuition, and as much as I wanted to believe that I could do this on my own, the reality was crushing. I sank down onto the front porch steps, pressing my hands to my face. Emma! I looked up to see Grandma Margaret standing by the porch railing, her sharp eyes studying me. She didn't look surprised. She never did. It was as if she had always known this moment was coming. She sat down beside me, the wooden steps creaking beneath her. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Finally, she sighed. I was like you once. I turned to her, frowning. What do you mean? Margaret's gaze drifted toward the horizon. When I was your age, I wanted to leave. I wanted more than this town, but I was afraid. I let them convince me that leaving was impossible. She shook her head. I won't make that mistake again. I swallowed, unsure what she was saying. Grandma! I have money, she interrupted. Enough to help you get started. If you're serious about leaving, I'll support you. Shock flooded through me. You would do that? She turned back to me, a small smile tugging at her lips. I would do anything to see you break free. For the first time that night, hope flickered inside me. Maybe I wasn't alone after all. Maybe I never had been. Birthdays never meant much in the Carter household, not for me at least. When Ryan turned 18, my parents threw him a grand party, complete with expensive gifts, a crowd of guests, and speeches about the bright future ahead of him. My birthday, on the other hand, was more of a formality, a small dinner with family, a cake my mother baked without much enthusiasm, and a few gifts that felt more like obligations than celebrations. This year was no different. I sat at the dining table, my hands folded in my lap, forcing a polite smile as Mom carried out the cake. It was a simple vanilla cake with white frosting, no decorations, no candles. I doubted she had even asked what kind I wanted. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," she said, though the words held no real warmth. "Happy birthday, Em," Ryan added lazily, barely looking up from his phone. Dad nodded in approval, as if the entire ordeal was a necessary task rather than a meaningful occasion. 18. You're officially a woman now, ready to start thinking about your future. By future, he meant marriage. Mom placed a single gift box in front of me, neatly wrapped in soft pink paper. "Open it," she said, smiling in that way she always did when she was trying to make me accept something I didn't want. I peeled back the wrapping to reveal a delicate gold bracelet, elegant, subtle, something a wealthy wife would wear, not something for a girl planning to go to college. "It belonged to your grandmother," Mom said. "We thought it would be perfect for you." I ran my fingers over the thin chain, knowing exactly what this meant. This was my welcome into the role they had chosen for me. This was them reminding me that my future had already been decided. "Thank you," I said quietly, though my voice felt hollow. Ryan snorted. "You don't sound excited." I ignored him, swallowing the lump forming in my throat. This night was just another reminder that I didn't belong here. And then Grandma Margaret cleared her throat. She had been sitting at the far end of the table, silent through most of the evening, watching. Now she leaned forward, setting a plain white envelope in front of me. "I have a gift for you, too," she said. Mom's smile stiffened. "Margaret, you didn't have to—" "I wanted to," Margaret cut her off smoothly. Curious, I picked up the envelope and carefully opened it. Inside was a check, a very large check. I blinked at the number, convinced I was seeing things. $50,000. I looked up at her, stunned. "Grandma, I can't accept this." She smiled knowingly. "Yes, you can. And you will." The room fell into complete silence. Dad's expression darkened instantly. "Margaret," he said in a warning tone. Margaret simply sipped her tea, unfazed. "I saved for years, never having the chance to chase my dreams. I won't let Emma miss hers." Mom's eyes flickered between me and the check, her knuckles whitening. "That's a lot of money," she said carefully. Ryan, however, had no such restraint. "Are you kidding me?" he burst out. 50 grand? For her? What does she even need it for?" My hands trembled as I stared at the check, my heart pounding so loudly I could barely hear anything else. "Emma is going to college," Margaret said firmly. "This is for her future." Ryan scoffed. "What future? She doesn't need money, I do. I've got business ideas. I could actually use that money for something important." "Enough, Ryan," Dad snapped, though not out of fairness. No, I could see it in his face. He was already siding with him. Dad turned to Margaret, his voice low and dangerous. "That money should stay in the family. If you wanted to help, you could have given it to Ryan. He's the one who will carry on the Carter name." Margaret held his gaze, her expression unreadable. "I gave it to the person who deserves it." A muscle in Dad's jaw twitched. "You've made your point," he said coldly. Then he turned to me. "Emma, give the check to Ryan." I felt Ryan's smug gaze burning into me, already assuming victory. I gripped the check tightly in my hands, my mind spinning. If I handed it over, it would be gone forever. My one chance at escape, at independence, at building something of my own, gone. I lifted my chin, meeting my father's stare. No. Ryan laughed, shaking his head. Oh, come on. What are you going to do with it? Waste it on school? I glared at him. No, the problem is that you don't deserve it. His smile vanished. You little... Ryan! Dad cut him off, his voice hard. He turned back to me, his anger simmering beneath the surface. This isn't a request. If you want to stay in this house, you'll do as you're told. And there it was, the final push, the last ultimatum. I gripped the check in my hands, my pulse racing. If I gave in, I would never get another opportunity like this. If I refused, I would lose everything. My home, my family, my security. But I had already lost them, hadn't I? They had never really been mine. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. Then I guess I don't stay in this house. Mom gasped. Emma, you don't mean that. But I did. I knew I did. I had never been more certain of anything in my life. Dad's face turned red with barely contained rage. If you walk out that door, don't expect us to come after you. Ryan smirked. Yeah, good luck making it out there, Princess. Margaret stood, placing a hand on my shoulder. She won't have to do it alone. I turned to her, my vision blurring with unshed tears. Are you sure? She smiled softly. I've never been more sure of anything. That was it. My decision was made. That night, I packed my bags. By morning, I was gone. The road out of Fredericksburg felt longer than I had imagined. The town I had lived in my entire life stretched behind me, fading in the rearview mirror as Margaret's car moved steadily forward. I watched the familiar streets disappear, the houses of neighbors who had known me since I was a child growing smaller and smaller. I should have felt something, regret, fear, doubt, but all I felt was relief. Margaret drove in silence for a while, letting me process everything. The weight of my decision pressed against my chest, but it wasn't the suffocating kind I had grown used to. It was something new, something lighter. A weight that reminded me I was finally the one in control of my own life. She finally spoke, her voice calm and steady. You're sure about this? I turned to her, gripping the envelope with the $50,000 check still inside. I don't have a choice. If I go back, they'll never let me leave again. Margaret nodded, as if she understood that better than anyone. Good. Then we won't look back. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had someone on my side. Adjusting to freedom living with Margaret was nothing like living with my parents. For one, she actually listened to me. She didn't try to dictate my future, didn't question my choices, didn't remind me at every turn that I was just a girl. Instead, she let me breathe, let me figure things out on my own. But freedom came with its own set of challenges. I had spent my whole life preparing for a future I wasn't allowed to have, but now that it was actually mine, I didn't know where to start. The first thing Margaret helped me do was open a bank account. I sat beside her at the small-town bank, signing forms with shaking hands as the teller processed my first deposit. Seeing the balance, $50,000 sitting in my name, felt surreal. It was more money than I had ever seen at once, and yet I knew it wouldn't last forever. I needed to be smart. You'll need to find a job soon, Margaret said as we left the bank. I know, I admitted. I've never had one before. She gave me a knowing look. You'll figure it out. And so I did. Finding my own way. The first few weeks were a blur of firsts. My first job interview at a small coffee shop downtown, where the manager raised an eyebrow at my lack of experience but hired me anyway because they needed an extra pair of hands. My first paycheck, which was small but felt like a victory. My first apartment search, flipping through listings with Margaret, who promised to help me cover rent until I could afford it myself. Everything was new, and sometimes it was overwhelming. There were nights when I lay awake, wondering if I had made a mistake, wondering if my parents were right, if I would fail, if I would end up regretting this. But those moments never lasted long. Every time doubt crept in, I reminded myself of what I had left behind. One day, as I walked home from work, I passed a group of girls my age outside a boutique. They were dressed in elegant sundresses, their hair perfectly curled, their nails painted soft, delicate colors. I recognized a few of them from high school, girls who had accepted their roles without question, who were probably engaged or already married. They glanced at me, whispering among themselves. I didn't look away. I didn't feel envy or regret. I felt free. The consequences of their choices. Back at home, things were falling apart. But not for me. Margaret still heard things through the grapevine. Ryan's business ventures had failed. Again. Without the money from Margaret's check, he had no safety net. He had no backup plan, no financial security. For the first time in his life, he had to deal with the consequences of his own actions. "Your mother came by the other day," Margaret mentioned one afternoon, stirring sugar into her tea. I blinked. "What?" "She didn't stay long, just wanted to talk." I waited, my stomach twisting. "And?" Margaret sighed. "She asked if you were okay." I scoffed. She didn't care if I was okay when she kicked me out. "She also wanted to know if you'd come back." I stared at her, not sure if I had heard her correctly. "She what?" Margaret met my gaze, her expression unreadable. She didn't say it outright, but I could tell. "Things are getting hard for them, Emma. Without you around, they're realizing how much they relied on you." A strange mix of emotions swirled in my chest. Part of me wanted to laugh, part of me wanted to cry. But mostly, I just felt nothing. I took a deep breath. "I'm not going back." Margaret smiled. "I didn't think you would." Becoming someone new. Months passed. My bank account grew. My confidence grew. I found an apartment of my own, a tiny studio with creaky floors and chipped paint, but it was mine. I enrolled in community college, easing my way into classes, balancing work and school and independence. It was exhausting. It was terrifying. But it was everything I had ever wanted. One day, while cleaning out my things, I found the gold bracelet my mother had given me on my birthday. I stared at it for a long time, running my fingers over the delicate chain. Then, without hesitation, I sold it. It was never meant for me. The final goodbye. A year later, I received a letter from my parents. I almost didn't open it, but curiosity got the better of me. "Emma, we hope you are doing well. Your father and I would like to talk. Things have been difficult lately, and we would like to see you. Maybe we can put the past behind us." Mom and Dad. I sat with the letter for a long time, rereading the words. Nowhere did they apologize. Nowhere did they admit they had been wrong. They weren't reaching out because they missed me. They were reaching out because they needed me. I folded the letter carefully, walked to the trash can, and dropped it inside. I had already made my choice. I wasn't going back. I was free.